back to the stream. Good evening, everybody. Phoenix here. Today is Saturday, August the 31st. We got a hot one today here in Phoenix. I hope everyone who's tuning into this is having an amazing evening. And if you like this content, consider hitting that like button. Before we get started, I want to just give a shout out to all the EOS community. And we're going to do a little rundown today of all the special peeps in and around the Fam Bam. So we got Enrique from DAPP Stars. I know he's kind of changed that name up, but aka the Mandela in the house. Crypto Feez, always doing his thing, and hope to see him make some new videos. We haven't seen him in a while, so shout out to you, Crypto Feez, if you're tuning into this, or if you happen to catch it on the replay. We got the Crypto Type, always dropping amazing content for EOS, and always coming with his own perspectives and highlighting a lot of the issues we have with governance as of late, which we're going to get into tonight. So that'll be fun. Shout out to Rezi, who's actually tuned in live. Thanks to the gang. Awesome to see you tonight. We got the EOS Apologist, who's actually announced he's signing off, at least maybe in the interim, and he's going to be focusing more on development, it sounds like. So congrats to the Apologist, and I hope to hear more about what you're working on. In fact, I'm doing a similar thing. It's just why I don't do a lot of these videos too often. I try to do one probably every 2 weeks. And I know the Apologist now has mentioned he's going to take a lot of the time he used to invest in creating these community videos into more in the development realm, and that should help him become even more influential within the network. So we've all seen his amazing content. We've all seen the bot that he made and his thoughts, which made a lot of unique and great points in a lot of those videos. So I know we're gonna miss him, but excited to see what comes out next from him. We got the Everything EOS guys, Zach Gall and Rob Finch, who enough said, right? No introductions needed. Those guys are amazing. If you guys haven't checked out the latest one today, I highly encourage you to check out the video they made today, which gives a rundown of so many different things going on in the EOS space. So definitely give that a check and see if you guys like it. It's probably, arguably, probably one of the best shows, the best show, the best weekly show, the most consistent show in all of EOS. And I mean that sincerely, because day in, day out, when even in tough weeks, they still show up. And half this battle, I think, in my opinion, is just showing up. Showing up, putting in the work, and staying dedicated. So a lot of respect, major respect for those guys. And I'm sure you guys all feel similar. We got Shaheen from Blocksmith. Shout out to Shaheen. The EOS radio guys, Zane and Ash, those guys also put in the work on a weekly basis. They put out a show, and it's more in a radio format, but it's definitely worth checking out. So give those guys some props and check them out if you're interested in hearing a different perspective, in fact, in contrast to the Everything EOS guys. And then Happy Money Man out in San Francisco or California. He also has pretty interesting content every once in a while. Has some really nice interviews with people in and around the EOS community space. And I've had a lot of opportunities to meet him in person, chat with him. He's just an amazing guy. So this is kind of just a rundown of just people who I find to be like-minded and people of interest. We have these characters in the space, and it's nice to just do a shout out to everybody. And then new on the scene, or someone who's new or who I have started to pick up content from, is Imagine Tech. And shout out to that brother who's creating some awesome videos as well on EOS in the EOS space. So with that said, and all the shout outs done, and anybody who I left out, my apologies. Everybody from the gang, obviously, it's all love. So thanks for tuning in. to this Visionario and company. I'm sure you'll be catching this on the replay, gang. So, first of all, where do we think we are versus where are we is the first thing I want to talk about. And hopefully the audio is coming in okay. In 2018, well, let's even back up before that. 2016, 2017, it was all about promises. And for those that weren't around, it was an incredible time because you had this huge amount of hopium, which actually reminds me, I did forget one particular character in the EOS community space, at least one. I know I'm forgetting many, but M Blue Crypto, the Butter Man. I want to say shout out to Butter. That Butter Man doing his thing, and definitely smoking some good stuff. I always tease him and say on his videos that definitely want to light one up with him, if you know what I mean. He just I wonder sometimes what that guy's on with his hopium. No, I'm just giving him a hard time. I think he makes some amazing content as well. But M Blue Crypto is his name, and hopium is his game. So anyway, where we were at, where we think we are versus, oh, there's a bit of a reverb. Let me adjust that. Let's see if, okay, see if that's a little better. Kind of adjusted the settings here. Thanks for letting me know, Rosie. So where we think we are versus where we are. So in 2016, 2017, it was all about promises. It was all about hopium and lots of funds and just incredible amounts of money being thrown at all these projects with no actual deliverables. And in 2018, there's a huge dose of reality. And I lived through all this, the past 3 years. It's hard to believe it's been that long because it feels like it's a blink of the eye. But we went from a really ecosystem that was filled with a lot of promises to something more like realizing, I think, a harsh dose of reality and the fact that nothing had been built. We didn't have the regulatory space built, and we didn't have the plumbing. We didn't have the scalability, and we didn't have the education in the community, both within from the developer's perspective and even from the user's perspective. And so 2018 was kind of harsh. It was really tough for a lot of people. And for those that are still around, congrats, give yourselves a pat on the back. Even if a lot of you may have joined, towards the end of 2017, that would even be harder, in my opinion, to stomach versus a lot of us that I think who have been around for several years. And so 2019, what we have seen is building going on. Some flickers of hope is what I call it. And with that, you're seeing additional education and institutions coming around to understand this technology. We have backed within 3 weeks, or around 3 weeks, September 23rd of, we're basically into September, right, coming on through. And what this is going to allow is it's going to allow an on-ramp of many firms and possibly even more pension-type institutions to play in the space. And that may not seem very sexy or cool to a lot of people who are listening to this, but what you have to understand is that these funds, these institutions hold tremendous amounts of capital, trillions of dollars. If you look at the top 10 pensions, for example, in the United States, and just talking public pensions, top 10 alone, you're looking at a valuation of $1 trillion. And that's only in the United States. When you look at that from a global perspective, you might be looking at several $1 trillion. And if you're looking at private pensions, public pensions, everything combined, plus 401ks, you're looking at trillions upon trillions of dollars. Maybe several dozen, or maybe even in the hundreds, arguably. And so what you're going to start seeing, and already what you're seeing, and I encourage you guys to do this. Do one thing for me as you're watching this video. If you can Google pensions and funding levels for these pensions. Basically, what I'm talking about is what I mean by funding levels for pensions is the percentage of assets they hold relative to what they have to pay out. Most of these pensions are underfunded right now. So a lot of the fund managers are looking for ways to get gains, outstretched gains, to make up those shortfalls. What do you think is going to happen when they see an asymmetrical type asset that trades, something that trades asymmetrical to the rest of the market that's not correlated? What do you think they're going to need to do to basically act in the best interest of the people whose money they manage? They're going to have to get positions within cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, possibly even in the future EOS and Litecoin, Ethereum, etc. It's just a question of time, guys. So I know it doesn't sound, again, very sexy, but that's where we are from an institutional standpoint. And from a build-out standpoint, you're seeing some projects finally come online. Within EOS, obviously the tech remains solid, just a technology point right now. And individually, what I'm doing is I'm continuing to learn development on EOS. Today I dived into, and it's important to mention that, none of this is financial advice. Obviously, if you follow a guy on a radio show, especially this homie radio show, you're probably going to get wrecked. But with that said, what I'm doing is I continue to learn development on EOS. And specifically today, I dived into React and Redux, which are core, aspects of developing an application. React is more, provides the ability to render aspects of your application on the front end or the user interface. And, studying Redux and reducers and coming up with storage methods locally for the application to interact with the blockchain. So that's kind of what I learned today. And the past 2 weeks, I've been learning more about EOS tables, permissions, and actions. So it's been, a steep learning curve. It's definitely not like something you can just do in a weekend and put together. I think it's one of those things, at least for me, because I am a professional and I do my quote unquote, air quotes here, normal work. This is just something I do on the weekends, so it's taken me a little bit longer period of time to understand how to program, how to develop these things, how to test them, getting more familiar with EOS Studio. But I am starting to see some fruits come out of that, in a sense that I'm understanding the process. I'm understanding the essential core aspects of app development, and I'm able to follow along pretty well. And what I'm doing right now is I'm starting to branch out and reach out to other people who might be interested in developing blockchain applications on EOSIO locally, and hold little meetup groups. So there's about 4 or 5 people who signed up for these meetup groups that I hold here locally in Phoenix. Unfortunately, and what's interesting to me, what tells me that we're still extremely early, and what might be valuable to you guys to know, is that none of these people actually show up. So I have like these meetup groups. I have one general community meetup group, and there's a couple hundred people who are actually signed up to that meetup group. But we're excited if we get more than a handful of people that actually show up to those meetups. So people seem to be interested, but I guess my point is we're not at a level yet where this technology is recognized as a real opportunity for most people. And I know that sounds shocking to maybe a lot of people in the EOS community. When you step back and you just observe basic things and the way people, behave as humans, it actually isn't that surprising. You know, if you look at a EOS video, and I'm not saying I wouldn't even look at my content because honestly, my content isn't that great. I mean, I don't put a lot of preparation time into these videos. I do these videos because I'm passionate and I love to talk to other people about EOS. I don't spend a lot of times on graphics or getting my outlines of what I'm going to discuss right. Most of the stuff is unscripted. It's done after I'm doing some studying on EOS, or it's done after I'm looking at other content that others have produced. And, you know, I am in Phoenix, that is true, but my general observation is even people in the quote unquote startup community here, I'm talking about developers who are into cybersecurity and developing applications. You know, if this is the next wave of things, my point to you guys is I'm not seeing the interest levels spike up in any way. So I'm just giving you guys a sentiment of where we are in the space. And in contrast to even, I would say, 2018, I'm going to tell you guys that it's actually lower now than it was last year. So that is interesting to me that those decisions have been made by those people. Maybe it's because of a lack of education. Maybe it's a feeling that blockchain technology as an industry has hit some stagnation, and maybe those people don't think it has promise. I don't know what it is, but it is extremely interesting to me that, you know, we've had a lot of great announcements for those that are in the know, for those that have followed this channel, for those that are in everything EOS and crypto fees, etc. Those kinds of communities know things are going on under the hood. But I would tell you guys even the general tech public is not aware of these things. I spend a lot of my own time just investing in going to these events, tech events, because again, I'm a passionate person. I don't have anything to sell them, but you know, I like to educate people on what's occurring in the space, and most of them aren't aware. And even if they have, I guess, some time to spare, most of them don't really care about blockchain technologies yet. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. So the EOS technology remains solid. I continue to learn about it. I know others are continuing to learn about it. It looks like we have an additional person who joined, which is EOS Apologist, who I mentioned. And so that is interesting to me, that I think we're seeing people within the EOS community start to branch off more into actually developing the technology, which is a very good sign because they have intimate knowledge on how this tech works. You know, being an enthusiast, and even though we haven't programmed a lot of it in the past year since EOS is launched, we understand a lot of the nuances with what it possibly takes to create a successful application, the type of gamification that needs to occur, and also, you know, what type of uniqueness is needed to possibly gain adoption from users. So I continue to be excited about that, and yeah, I just find it interesting that the local has kind of waned off actually pretty significantly, especially I would say in the past 2 months, especially after the June event. It just kind of spiked down quite a bit. And along with that, in parallel to that, the sentiment, in my opinion, across the EOS network / community globally, again, from a community standpoint, appears to be a bit weaker. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, and my general observations, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong in the comments below, or if you're tuning into this video live, please interact on the community chat. But what I'm seeing is less BP outreach occurring, with the exception of possibly Cypherglass, EOS Nation, and EOS Detroit, at least in the western globe, right? We're seeing less BP outreach. So that's one thing. And we're seeing less transparency in terms of collaboration between the BPs. You know, in the beginning of EOS launching, we saw a lot of BPs work together to discuss governance issues and issues with upgrading. Now, one has to wonder, because EOS as a mainnet is getting upgraded to 1.8, and given the technical challenges with that, I wonder with less, I guess, collaboration between the BPs, how successful that upgrade will be, or if there's any risk with having the BPs we do now and having the need to upgrade to 1.8, does that impact the ability of the network to upgrade? And that's not something that a lot of people have talked about, but I'm kind of interested to hear a little bit more, I guess, about that, because from my understanding, the 1.8 upgrade is not exactly trivial. And I haven't heard of a lot of those BPs coordinating anything kind of like the way we did when we started this whole network. I remember back in the day, you had a Crypto Alliance, you had EOS New York, you had Cypherglass. You had a lot of these teams basically working together to ensure successful launch of the network. EOS Canada was another team that was very instrumental in this development. And so now I don't know, with the likes of who we have, would that cause a risk to the network not being able to upgrade? That's a question. Resi says, when all that Simon Dixon logic stuff happens, they will be more inclined to care about blockchains. I agree with that. I think, though, that we underestimate. I think, even if you've only been here for a year, your education level and the time you've spent to absorb all this information and the steep learning curve, you made that choice to do that. Now, the average person, you have to put yourself in their perspective, who watch football games and basketball games. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Listen, I love playing sports. I think I'm more of a player versus a watcher. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I think because that's basically their diet, right? Making a change to try to learn this technology, that's going to be a challenge. That I think for people like us who have been in this space for a long time, who now this technology almost becomes second nature, and even the craziness that it presents in some ways, the fact that you are now essentially a bank, right? You are your own bank, which comes with its benefits and its risks. That is viewed, to me, very radical if you tell most people that, okay? So I don't think it's going to be something that occurs overnight. And but yeah, that's a good point, Resi, though. So back to our sentiment in the EOS network. I mentioned the decreased collaboration between the BPs to discuss the issues, and also another thing that I notice is that there's less campaigning to the voters in the West overall about what the BP's core focuses are. In terms of, I guess what I'm trying to say is, what are they going to do for the network? Like, what is their main target? If you guys remember, in the very beginning of these things, there was an interest in basically the BPs doing active campaigning, and they would actually put out like weekly updates, not just in terms of their I guess their BP machines or their computational power or their computational upgrades. They actually put out like updates on what they were doing for the community, what types of initiatives they were taking on, additional responsibilities they were taking on in the community. And that seems to have kind of died down. And I'm wondering if you guys have also observed that. So at some point here, and I don't know exactly when it was, I want to say it was actually when, and I'm not pointing any fingers here, but I want to say it was when New York made the decision to do the BP signaling versus, I think, voting on initiatives. I think when that happened, we started to see even a more significant drawdown in active campaigning for BPs, requesting support and votes for taking on specific initiatives. Now it could be wrong, and maybe that occurred sometime thereafter or maybe much earlier, but my point is now we're not seeing any of that really. We're not seeing any real campaigning, and so it's hard to know what their value proposition is to the network. How is it that Western BPs can distinguish themselves from these, I guess, rebate BPs, right? The BPs that want to give out, like the new Dexes of the world, that propose to give out, a small percentage of rewards for voting for them, right? So what this means, I think, in the short term is, with the sentiment I think locally, I'm not saying that applies to everywhere, but I think you're not seeing that huge push of developers have an interest in EOS, because I don't think the communities are as strong as some other communities. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I'm just stating what my observations are, at least here locally. And I'm seeing less developer type events in the United States. I can't say the same thing for China. Maybe that's different. Resi says, everybody seems to be bored with EOS now though. Less excited about it with the everyday to day of it. Yeah, that's exactly right. But I guess what I'm saying is the sentiment itself is down. And so short term, my conclusion is, this is not investment advice, and this is just my opinion. I'm just giving you guys my opinion. I'm not here to sway you in any way, okay? You guys know I just like to tell it like it is, or how I think it's going to go. And so short term, I think this means that EOS may continue to remain weaker versus BTC. Now, there is a remote possibility that with the upgrade to 1.8, maybe you'll start to see a change in sentiment. Maybe that'll be a new catalyst for the EOS community. But as it stands right now, communities like EOS Mainnet, I think, will continue to remain weaker versus BTC. And I think a lot of these BPs and some notable people in the community have started to attempt to create their own chains and hype up other coins and claim that there's 500% return on investment in these coins. One of the things I would, caution the newbies on who see these claims is to carefully review the volume of these coins, because it's very easy to push a coin up 500% or 1,000% when the volume is only $20,000 or $100,000. That's not a lot of money to do, to push that volume, to push the price up on that small volume. So in my opinion, I agree with you, Resi. EOS still has one of the most highest potentials, but I think that, maybe even in the short term, it doesn't hurt to have some Bitcoin in place because of the general sentiment between the two, one being a little bit stronger than the other. So that's just my take on it. I think you're seeing on-ramps for Bitcoin and custodianship solutions being brought on in a much more aggressive fashion versus smaller cap coins like EOS. So in the short term, dominance will continue to remain pretty solid in my opinion. In the long term, if EOS is able to prove itself, you'll see it outsize gains for BTC against BTC, but that still needs to be proven. I mean, a lot of these folks in the community act like EOS has already won the battle, and I don't think we've done anything. We haven't launched the killer DAPP. So until you get mainstream adoption and that aha moment started, there's always going to be questions about how this is going to win out. And you got people like Mike Novogratz who are going to play both sides, because honestly, it's very hard to pick a winner. I mean, there are some, I guess, groups or projects that have staying power, and some would say EOS is one of them, and a lot of people would just prefer to stay in BTC and not battle, not gamble. So a lot of interesting things in that regards. And with that upgrade to 1.8, I mentioned, if you guys believe those top BPs who issue rebates right now, how they will fare performance-wise to help EOS upgrade. What will be their role as top BPs that are elected as number one? Will they be able to execute this upgrade? And I wonder if long-term, here's another question for you guys, because Dan Larimer kind of hinted at this, but I'm wondering long-term if, with the additional needs to, the additional requirements to produce blocks on EOS, are those BPs, do you think they can remain in their position and actually fulfill their duty? Because, right now, I get the impression like they've developed software to basically one-click their way into producing blocks and giving out rebates, and it's fairly basic. I think if you guys remember in the very beginning of the whole network starting up, I think at that time it was much more manual, much more command line. At one time it was much more complicated to possibly spin up a BP and actually be on the mainnet and produce blocks and coordinate with the other BPs. And I'm almost wondering if we'll get to a point again, maybe not due to the lack of tools, but just due to the lack of the need for technical competence in producing blocks. If we'll ever get to a need where BPs can't basically one-click their way to providing the best performance for scaling the mainnet. And so that could be a door where even if you had a lot of votes to produce blocks and earn, rewards on the network, maybe you're just blocked from doing it because you're not qualified. Like, you don't have the competence to actually pull it off with the speeds and scaling that's going to occur with EOS. So I think you might see some of that. Dan Larimer hinted at some of that with his version of the Olympics and competing for things. And I'm wondering if you inherently will have that as the network becomes more valuable and you have a need to produce more transactions per second and you have a need to coordinate with others more diligently. Will you see that start to have an influence on who's elected? That's really the question, because you could find yourself in a situation where you have those people elected, they're not able to produce maintain their performance, and the network suffers as a result in the short term. And in the long term, people look back to the experienced block producers for the solutions and ultimately re-elect them. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. It's really a more natural return to those that have created value for the network. So Resi says, whatever came of that vote buying post you made on Telegram? Nothing ever came of it because there's been no real, in my opinion, priority by the BPs to tackle it in an honest way. And so it just continues to be ignored. So with that said, on that point, I did confront EOS New York, and I asked them about their supposed proposal for governance, and kind of in relation to this vote buying post I made. And I asked them directly. I asked them if they would have that governance proposal in time to bake into the cake of the 1.8 upgrade. And I was told that it would take much, much longer for them to pull that off. And so the conclusion is, don't expect a governance upgrade with the 1.8 upgrade to the network. And so that's pretty bad news. That's a pretty big blow. And that may be why you saw somewhat a sell-off in EOS. This whole week it's the sentiment has been even more negative, because I think a lot of people were, including myself, a lot of people were expecting that they could actually incorporate a proposal with that upgrade. And now we're being told that it's not going to be a part of it. So, not the best news, guys. There, we'll have to see what happens. Maybe by Q4 or maybe Q1 of next year, that they'll have something. But per Kevin Rose, and Kevin, you can come out and I guess update your your forecast on the New York proposal, essentially. But my understanding in talking to you is, that wouldn't be ready for the upgrade. So I'm not blaming Kevin. I'm just saying, like, that's the reality of it. And I think a lot of people are counting on New York and others within the community to come out with some type of proposal to bake into that upgrade. And it's just not going to happen. So with that said, a couple more updates here. We got Bloxburg coming up. That's an inaugural annual event in Blacksburg, Virginia, and covering the blockchain space with Block 1 and EOSIO, likely playing a larger role. And I see this as more melding the education and government together, at least in that local area. So, and I'm joking too, Rezi. I mean, I think it's, it's funny though to say allegedly. Obviously that may have had an influence in some things, but I think those guys do a great job, and I think it's a very tough position to be in as those block producers, because you have to wonder that here they are busting their butt, trying to get this governance proposal, but at the same time, one, there's no real voters for them. They're outnumbered, okay, at least in the West. And two, even if they do get a solid proposal put together, there's no guarantee that the people who are now elected will want to support something like that. And so that's really the question I have. That's kind of why I went back, just based on logic. All this really points to a situation where the role of block production itself will need to drive who's elected as a BP, meaning the performance that they have on the network should drive if they are allowed to become a block producer. Right now it's very easy. It's easier, I think. It's a turnkey type solution. But could we see Block 1 with their software updates maybe push that metric or that level of expectations higher, such that those turnkey VPs get knocked off the network because they can't keep up with the demands? So that's what I'd like to see. I think you have some good ideas, Rezi, about distance and location into the code. I think, though, that approach needs to be weighed against it being a possible means of attack. If you start to dictate that they are, located in specific areas and there's only one there, or there's none, and a BP spins up to attack the network, that could be a potential form of attack. Although, to counter that argument, you would need to have all the BPs collude for there to be a legitimate attack, or at least 2/3 in some regards, for delegated proof of stake. So I think that's a pretty solid approach. It would be nice to see an example of that before having it on the mainnet. I'd like to see a smaller chain maybe prove that technology out. But yeah, I'm looking forward to possibly visiting Blacksburg and seeing that event. I'm wondering if it's going to be open to the public or just the Virginia Tech type alumni and students there. But that'd be a tremendous opportunity to hear a little bit more about Block 1's recent, I guess, milestones, or some of their visions, or just anything really blockchain. I think it would be really fun to be a part of that event. And then we have YubiKey and the partnership with EOS, and we saw this week that obviously Twitter, Jack Dorsey's account was hacked, And so you might see increased visibility on solutions such as EOSIO with YubiKey used as a means to enhance security for high profile accounts and personalities like the president. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. With that said, I think those are pretty much all my thoughts for tonight. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this show, Phoenix. Before we leave, take a few more questions. Resi asked, is there a Chinese version of C++? C++ is pretty much universal. I mean, I'm sure that the way in which people in China represent parameters as part of their code change. It could be written in Chinese, but the logic itself is the same, so it should be the same. So that's the beauty of C++, is that it's used all over the world. It's used on a lot of systems, and not just apps, but it's used on a lot of hardware as well. So it's I think the logic is actually the same. The logic is the same. The language is different. So the operators and operands on C++'s language would be the same. But the actual characters, obviously, those would be a little bit different. But the core parts are essentially the same. So that's really the beauty of it, is that you can use it basically anywhere around the world, and it's almost its own universal language. So with that said, I think I'm going to sign off. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks, Resi, for showing up tonight. And hopefully I see more of you guys live on the next one, probably in about 2 weeks on a Saturday just like this one. So if you like the content, hit the like button, leave your comments in the chat below. And until next time, this is Phoenix signing off. Peace.